the radical left,
the liberal left,
progressive, liberal, left-wing,
left-wing terrorism,
far right-wing, racist, fascist, authoritarian,
right-wing MAGA freak,
far-right extremists coming over the bridges into Manhattan.
Why is it that in politics we call things left-wing or right-wing? What does that even mean? The short answer to this question is that in 1789, the King of France was having some pretty serious financial problems, and called a large meeting in Versailles known as the Estates General. This meeting's main goal was to overcome these financial troubles, and part of overcoming that issue meant figuring out how to tackle the problem itself, which starts with distributing power. However, there were a lot of different tensions at the time surrounding this. Unlike how representatives are designed to represent the people or their provinces nowadays, France's representatives were divided by three groups: the church, the nobles, and the commoners, or your average working class person. Distributing power started at deciding how to verify the credentials of representatives. The traditional rule is that each of these three groups would check their own members' paperwork in separate rooms. However, others wanted all three groups to sit together and verify each other's paperwork at the same time. The idea was that by breaking down the physical walls between groups, the commoners would get more power. To get a vote on this idea, instead of counting all 500 people in the room, the leader, to save time, told everyone to move to the left side if they wanted to change this process, and to move to the right side if they wanted to keep things the way they were. And that's basically what started it. Those who wanted what was considered radical change during the French Revolution would sit on the left, and those who supported the old system and wanted to stick with the king and preserve the way things were would sit on the right. So that's how the terms left and right came to be. But this doesn't actually come to answer the question of why politics are considered left or right wing. On the Wikipedia page for the left-right political spectrum, Wikipedia says that, quote, "The left-right political spectrum is a system of classifying political positions, ideologies, and parties." So, as Wikipedia says, the terms left and right are just a type of classification for political positions. And this makes sense because politics existed long before the terms left and right even existed, far before the French decided to divide parliamentary disputes by the side of the room. So if that's the case, why did it stick? Why do we continue to divide all of politics by a set of two possible directions? I think that answer has a lot to do with what left and right even mean, so let's answer that question. What do the left and right even represent? I think the most common answer is that those on the left are progressive and those on the right are conservative. And that makes sense for the most part. Using the France example we were talking about earlier, those on the left believed in progressing the National Assembly, whereas those on the right wanted to conserve the structures that were initially put in place. And I think this framing raises the question, why don't we just use these terms instead of the terms left and right? Well, for one, I think this definition has a lot of flaws. For first, what does progress even entail? What is the left even progressing towards? Secondly, progressives support conserving the environment, at least far more than conservatives do. So this notion of progress versus conservation is inherently flawed. But the question of why don't we just use the terms progressive and conservative instead of left and right still kind of holds, because at least progressive and conservative actually mean something that everyone immediately understands, whereas left and right are just an arbitrary set of directions. The question as to what the left and right represent has one main issue. The term left and right depends on the place, the person, and the time. For example, in the US, the Democratic Party is considered a left-wing party, whereas in the rest of the world, for the most part, the Democratic Party is considered a centrist or right-wing party. Another example is the abolition of slavery. During the debate as to whether slavery should exist, it was the left that supported the abolition of slavery. In Britain, it was the left-wing Whig Party which supported abolition. In the US, it was the Republicans, which initially was the left-wing party before it switched with the Democrats to become the right-wing party during the 1900s. But today, almost everyone treats what was once a far-left idea as something not far left. Instead, it is a natural and obvious thing that nearly everyone believes in. I'm providing these examples to get at the idea that what is considered left and right is completely subjective. I think Wikipedia gives a solid definition of the right and left, one that incorporates this subjective aspect. Left-wing politics are opposed to social hierarchies, while right-wing politics are in favor of social hierarchies. While I think this is a solid definition, I don't think this does a good job of explaining what the left and right actually are. So let's use a couple examples to better conceptualize this idea. The economic system of feudalism had a legally determined social hierarchy, with lords at the top and peasants at the bottom. During the switch from the economic system of feudalism to capitalism, it was the capitalists who were considered far left for even attempting to switch from an economic system of an explicit, legal, top-down hierarchy to an economic system that incentivized profit with no explicit legal hierarchies. Today, to the essence of the matter, it is now capitalists who are considered right-wing, whereas socialists are considered left-wing, which kind of highlights how what we call left and right are relative to the time we live in. Another example of this is the abolition of discrimination laws in the US. This was a very clearly leftist position, as the main advocates for ending discrimination, figures such as MLK and Malcolm X, were socialists. Notice how the trend between all of these examples of left and right share one thing in common. The idea of left and right is nearly synonymous with oppressed versus oppressor, with the left advocating for the oppressed and the right advocating for the oppressor. In France, the left wanted to provide more rights to the oppressed working class commoners, whereas the right advocated for the king by trying to keep things the way they were. The abolition of slavery was a struggle between the slaves, the oppressed, and the oppressor, or the master. Same with peasants versus feudal lords, or the African Americans versus the US justice system. Left versus right, depending on your definition, is most likely not the same classification of political ideology as oppressed versus oppressor. And that's completely fine. Maybe you disagree with everything that I've said in the past few minutes. In the end, it doesn't matter, and I'll explain why in just a bit. But the political classifications of someone being pro-oppressor versus pro-oppressed helps to answer the question asked at the beginning of the video. Why are politics called left or right-wing? Why did the terms left and right stick? If you had no knowledge of politics whatsoever and were told to choose whether you are left or right-wing, it would be a choice of personal preference as to which side you would pick. But if you had no knowledge of politics and were told to choose between being pro-oppressed or pro-oppressor, the answer is a lot more obvious. The choice you make is less so about personal choice and more so about moral conviction or moral necessity. This proves that the idea of left and right is merely just a social construct created to overcomplicate political conflicts. Left versus right is useful to oppressors and those in power because it is so neutral that it doesn't represent anything. I mean, left and right are just directions, right? And that's the entire point. The idea of left versus right is purely meant to divide people, namely the oppressed class, against each other. Oppressors and people in power can use this identification that people incorporate into their identity to prevent oppressed and working class people from rising up and fighting their oppressors.
Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state.
Unlike left and right, oppressed versus oppressor are principles, something that doesn't require mental gymnastics to decide who to support. Because unlike the idea of left versus right, oppressed versus oppressor is a struggle that has existed for all of recorded human history. By being a set of principles instead of some abstract political ideology, everyone is provided with much more clarity as to who they need to support and who they need to fight.
The United States of America has played a unique role as an anchor of global security and as an advocate for human freedom.
Father me, did America shoot him? Why?
Why did we shoot your dad?
Yes, why?
I didn't shoot your dad.
America shoot father, why?
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 I used to say that, hey, if you as a gay person would go to Gaza, they'd throw you off of tall buildings, right? Now they don't have any tall buildings left, so I don't... Is that too soon? I'm sorry. Maybe you shouldn't kill Jews, stupid Muslims.
Determining who is oppressed and who is the oppressor is pretty obvious. The oppressed are those who are born into slavery, or born without the right to live out a life they want to have. They are those who are restricted of basic necessity. They are those who don't get the same rights as others because they are born in a different part of the world.
Because you're Christians and not Muslims, you can go into the mosque and then go to the synagogue if you want to.
Okay, cool.
He can't go with you though.
Alright.
Okay, because he's a Muslim.
Alright.
They are those who don't get to live out their life fully, or have their family live out their life fully. By contrast, the oppressors are those with the power, but not only those in power, but the systems that enable those in power to continue to wield their power. With the idea of oppressed versus oppressor, everyone knows which side to pick. When oppressed versus oppressor is centered as the primary political classification, it is hard to argue for the oppressor or to argue against the oppressed, because everyone understands that any type of argument against the oppressed only serves to help the oppressors, and that any argument that favors the oppressors in any way only serves to help oppress others. Everyone understands to always fight for the oppressed and always fight the oppressor. So instead of asking someone whether they are left-wing or right-wing politically, ask them whether they are pro-oppressed or pro-oppressor. You can help to shift the narrative to something actually productive, something that can actually help to further humanity. To grow as a society, it is important to determine who are the most oppressed, as well as its roots of oppression, and to pull its roots out from the soil that it inhabits, forming a society where we work towards planting trees where the weeds of oppression once grew.